My name is Emily Carter, and if you had met me in 10th grade, you probably would have thought I was just another small-town American girl with big dreams. I had braces, a backpack full of doodled notebooks, and a crush on the boy who always lent me his pencil in math class. But that year, everything in my life shattered. I was 15 when I found out I was pregnant. 15. I remember sitting in that tiny bathroom at Ridgeview High, staring at the 2 pink lines that showed up way too fast on the test. My hands shook so bad I dropped it on the floor. I didn't even know whether to cry or scream. All I could think was, my parents are going to kill me. And I was right. When I told them, they didn't yell, at least not at first. My mom just stared at me like I wasn't even her daughter anymore. My dad paced the room, clenching his fists, muttering words I couldn't make out. Finally, my mom's voice cracked. "Pack your things. If you've ruined your life, you're not ruining ours." That was it. No hug, no tears. Just exile. By midnight, I was standing on the porch with a backpack and nowhere to go. The father of my baby, Jake, wasn't in the picture. He was 17, scared, and ran the second I told him. So it was just me, 15, pregnant, and homeless. I ended up sleeping on my best friend Lily's couch for a few weeks, but her parents made it clear I couldn't stay forever. Eventually, I found shelter at a church program for teenage mothers. They gave me food, a bed, and most importantly, hope. Those 9 months were brutal. I worked at a diner after school, waddling around with swollen ankles, hiding behind my apron as customers stared at me. Some days I wanted to disappear. But when I finally held my baby boy, Ethan, in my arms, I knew I'd fight the whole damn world to protect him. I thought my parents were gone from my life for good. They didn't visit me at the hospital. They didn't call. They didn't send a card for Ethan's first birthday. For 20 years, I raised my son alone, building a life brick by brick. I worked 2 jobs, studied at night, and somehow managed to get my nursing degree. Ethan grew up smart, kind, and strong. He wasn't just my son. He was my reason for breathing. For years, I told myself my parents were dead to me. That's what it felt like. But I was wrong. Because 2 decades later, out of nowhere, they came back. Not with apologies. Not with regret. They came back with lawyers. I still remember the moment I opened that thick white envelope. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, Ethan's college acceptance letter still pinned proudly to the fridge. My hands trembled as I read the words, "Petition for grandparent rights and custody. Custody." My parents, who had thrown me out, who had left me to starve, were now suing me for the right to take my son. At first, I laughed. It sounded insane. But then the reality sank in. They had money, connections, and the kind of polished, church-going image people love to believe. Meanwhile, I was just a single mom who had scraped her way through life. That night, I told Ethan. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling on his phone, when I blurted it out. "They're suing us," I said. He looked up. "Who?" "Your grandparents." The word felt foreign in my mouth. He laughed, thinking I was joking. But when he saw my face, his smile dropped. "You mean the people who abandoned you? The people I've never even met?" "Yeah," I whispered. "Them," he clenched his jaw. "They don't get to do this. They don't get to just walk in after 20 years and pretend they care. But they did." And that's when I realized this wasn't just a legal battle. It was war. For years, I'd buried the pain, telling myself I was stronger without them. But as I stared at that lawsuit, the anger I had shoved down for decades came roaring back. They had taken everything from me once. I wasn't about to let them take Ethan. Not now. Not ever. So I made a vow right then and there. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. And I wasn't the scared little girl they threw out anymore. I was a mother. And this time, I was ready for revenge. The first court date was set for a rainy Monday morning in March. I remember pulling into the courthouse parking lot, my stomach tied in knots, clutching the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Ethan was at college already, and though he begged to skip class and come with me, I told him no. This was my fight, but when I stepped inside that cold, echoing building, I nearly lost my breath. Because there they were, my parents. They looked older, of course. My dad's once black hair had turned silver, his posture still stiff and military-like. My mom was wearing a beige suit, pearls at her neck, the kind of outfit she used to wear to Sunday service. They looked respectable, normal, like the kind of grandparents everyone wishes for. But I knew the truth. They saw me across the hall, and for the briefest second, our eyes locked. My mom's lips twitched, almost like she wanted to smile. My dad didn't flinch. He just looked through me like I was nothing. Then their lawyer appeared. Some slick, polished man in a $1,000 suit with a briefcase that probably cost more than my car. He shook their hands, patted my mom's shoulder, and led them away like they were saints. That's when my own lawyer walked up. She wasn't fancy. Her name was Janet, a no-nonsense woman with sharp glasses and a sharper tongue. She'd taken my case because she believed in me, not because I had money. Still, I could see the worry in her eyes. "They're going to play the sympathy card," Janet warned. "They'll act like concerned grandparents who just want what's best for Ethan. And the court system? Sometimes it buys into that." My blood boiled. They didn't care when I was 15 and alone. They didn't care when I was broke and begging for help. They can't just erase all of that now. Janet nodded. "We'll make sure the judge hears the whole story. But you need to stay calm. Don't let your anger show. That's what they're counting on." The courtroom itself felt like a stage. My parents sat on one side, back straight, whispering politely with their lawyer. I sat alone on the other, clutching a folder full of Ethan's report cards. Photos and letters. Proof that I had raised him. Loved him and never once failed him. When the judge entered, everyone stood. My knees shook, but I forced myself upright. Their lawyer went first. His voice was smooth, almost syrupy. "Your Honor, my clients are simply concerned. They were unfairly kept from their grandson's life, and they wish to establish a bond before it's too late. They only want the chance to know him, to provide him with stability and guidance." I wanted to scream. Kept from his life? They were the ones who slammed the door on me. They didn't just miss birthdays. They missed decades. When it was my turn, Janet stood. Her words were firm, cutting straight to the point. "Your Honor, this isn't about bonding. This is about control. 20 years ago, when Emily needed her parents most, they abandoned her. She built a life for herself and her son without them. Now that Ethan is successful, heading to college, suddenly they've reappeared. This isn't love. This is an attempt to rewrite history." The judge listened, expression unreadable. The rest of that hearing blurred together. I remember the gavel striking, the date for the next court session being set. But more than anything, I remember the smirk on my mother's face as she stood to leave. She leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You never should have kept him from us. You'll regret it." Her voice sent a chill straight through me. That night, I drove home with my chest tight, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. My phone buzzed the second I walked through the door. It was Ethan. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice full of worry. "They're playing nice," I said bitterly. "Acting like saints. But don't you worry. They're not going to win." "I'll testify," Ethan said. "I'll tell the judge I don't even want to see them." I sighed, my throat tight. "We'll see. I don't want you dragged into this more than you already are." But deep down, I knew he'd have to be. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about him, his life, his future. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the lawsuit again. That's when it hit me. They weren't after visitation. They wanted custody. They wanted to take Ethan away from me. Something snapped inside me then. The hurt, the betrayal, the years of silence, all of it hardened into one thing: fury. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. I wasn't 15 anymore. I wasn't scared, broken, or begging for scraps. I was stronger now, smarter. And I had something they'd never understand: a son who actually loved me. So I made a plan. If they wanted to drag me through court, fine. But I wasn't going to just defend myself. I was going to destroy them. Once the case moved into discovery, the gloves came off. Papers arrived like a second paycheck. Financial records, old letters, tax returns, affidavits. Their lawyer was relentless. He dug into my past like a miner hunting for gold, trying to find anything that could make me look unfit. I expected that. What I did not expect was how fast he would find things to twist. Janet warned me it was standard practice. They will try to paint your life as unstable. Single mom, lower income, emotional history. It's cheap, but sometimes it works. She tapped her pen against the folder. We need to be smart. You have evidence. We will use it. We started by organizing everything. Photos of Ethan's birthdays, teacher recommendations, employment records, my nursing certifications, letters from neighbors and friends. Each document became a brick in the wall I was building to keep my son safe. I also dug up old memories, not because I wanted to relive them, but because I needed to catalog them. Dates, names, the exact words my parents had said when they left. Every detail mattered. Then Janet asked the question I had not expected. Did you ever try to contact them after they left? Letters, calls, anything? My mouth went dry. I had tried in the beginning. I had left messages, sent a few holiday cards, showed up at their house once with Ethan when he was 3. My mother refused to open the door. Later, I stopped trying. It felt like banging on a locked gate that would never open. Janet nodded slowly. We will not hide that you reached out. But we will show the pattern: silence, rejection, abandonment. And if they try to claim ignorance, we will have the records. In court, their story was polished. They claimed concern, compassion, a newfound religion that had humbled them. Their neighbors wrote letters about their involvement in the community, their church activities, how they had become model grandparents. The thing about people who know how to perform respectability is that they get rewarded for it. The judge listened politely. Social proof matters. It is an ugly truth, but I knew it from too many nights working double shifts and watching people assume things about me. One night, after a long day of depositions, I sat in my kitchen and stared at a photo album. Ethan at 5 with chocolate on his face, Ethan at 10 with a bandage on his knee, Ethan at 17 in a cap and gown at the community college. There were gaps in my heart, but the album was full of the moments we had made together. That was my proof, and then the unexpected came. A knock on my door in the late afternoon. I opened it to find a man I did not recognize. He was in his 50s, polo shirt, hesitant smile. His name was Mark, and he carried an envelope. I used to live 2 doors down from you, he said, voice low. Back when your parents still lived in town? I saw your mom once after you left. She came by to drop off something for the church. He paused, searching for words. She looked at your picture and she said she was ashamed. Told me she couldn't have anything to do with you. Anger flushed through me, so hot my face burned. Why are you telling me this now? Mark shifted. Because I found these in my attic. Old letters, yours. You wrote them after you left. I never knew what they were for until recently. I thought you should have them back. He handed me a stack of envelopes, yellowed from time. My name was on each one in my handwriting, scrawled from the long nights when I had crawled into bed and forced myself to believe things could get better. I took them like they were fragile relics. I sat on my kitchen floor and opened them. The letters were raw and honest. I begged for forgiveness. I offered to come home if only they would let me build a bridge. I wrote about Ethan and how he was learning to read, how proud I was of him, how I needed his grandparents to be part of his life. I had not remembered those letters in years. I had not known that somewhere they had been opened and tossed aside, or maybe saved and then hidden. Either way, these letters changed the story. They proved I had tried. They proved my parents had chosen to cut me off. When I took the letters to Janet, she smiled the first true smile I had seen in months. This is gold, she said. This shows intent. You did everything you could. They chose to abandon you. Now they are trying to rewrite history. We will make them answer for these letters in court. Their lawyer did not like the letters. He tried to discredit the witness who produced them. He said the envelopes could have been planted. He argued chain of custody like a fisherman flinging doubt to confuse the judge. But the handwriting matched other samples, and Mark's testimony was clear. He described where he found the envelopes, why he saved them, and how he recognized my writing. The more evidence we gathered, the more their facade began to crack. Short, awkward silences replaced their polished speeches. The pearl necklaces could not hide the tremor in my mother's hands when she was asked about those years. My father's jaw tightened until it seemed like he might choke, and his answers grew shorter under pressure. But even with the cracks, they had the advantage of wealth and respectability. They had money to throw at experts and psychologists who could testify that a young, single mother from a modest background struggled to provide stability. They hired a family therapist to say what they wanted the court to hear. They brought in a genealogist to emphasize family continuity. They had resources, and resources can rewrite perception. That's when I decided I needed a resource of my own. I could not fight their money. I could not buy testimonies or hire expensive experts. But I had something they could not buy. I had truth, and I had the lives they had tried to erase. I began to speak with people who mattered. Ethan's teachers, his coach, his childhood pediatrician, neighbors who had watched us for years. One by one, they agreed to help. Some were hesitant at first. worried about being dragged into a messy court case. But when they read the letters Mark had found and remembered what they had seen, they changed their minds. They wanted to testify to the reality of our life. The day a childhood pediatrician agreed to a deposition, I felt a weight lift. Dr. Alvarez had been the one who had checked Ethan's heartbeat when he was born. She remembered writing notes about Emily, a young mother doing everything she could, how she followed through with vaccinations and checkups, the careful way she handled her son. Her words were calm but firm in the deposition. She did not sugarcoat the difficulties, but she spoke to Emily's competence and determination. As the discovery phase dragged on, my anger shifted from raw pain to meticulous strategy. Revenge in this case was a quiet, methodical process. It was not about theatrics. It was about dismantling the polished picture my parents had painted and revealing the truth behind their righteousness. I started to keep a journal, but not one for emotions. It was a record of steps taken, dates, names, statements, and outcomes. Each entry tightened the web we were building around their narrative. At night, I would read the letters again and fold them carefully into their envelopes. The words were not just pleas. They were testimony. They were the bloodline of a daughter who had tried to come home and had been denied. They fueled me in a way anger alone could not. This fight would not be won in a courtroom alone. It would be won in the court of truth. And truth, I knew, had a stubborn way of revealing itself if you were patient and precise. There was still a long road ahead. Cross-examinations loomed. Expert witnesses, film testimonies, character assessments. It was messy and it was exhausting. But for the first time since that night when my mother had shut the door on me, I felt the balance shift. The fight was no longer shadowboxing. It had rules, witnesses, and a paper trail, and the paper trail was on my side. The trial date drew closer, and with it came a weight in my chest that never seemed to lift. Every day felt like a countdown. I went through my shifts at the hospital with a permanent knot in my stomach, pretending everything was fine for my patients, but inside I was raging. Janet called me into her office one Friday afternoon. Her desk was stacked with binders, each one labeled with a different part of my case. She leaned forward, glasses perched on her nose, and said, "We need to prepare you for the stand." My heart skipped. They'll put me up there? Absolutely. They'll want to make you crack. They'll ask about your past, about Ethan's father, about your struggles. They'll make you relive it all. If you show anger or break down, they'll use it against you. So we rehearsed, so we did, over and over. She played the role of their lawyer, hammering me with cruel questions. Why did you get pregnant at 15? Why didn't you finish school on time? Did you bring different men into your son's life? Did you ever ask your parents for forgiveness? Each question stung like a reopened wound. Sometimes I wanted to shout. Other times I wanted to walk out of her office and never come back. But each time I forced myself to breathe and answer calmly. By the end of the week, my throat felt raw, but I was stronger. I wouldn't let them twist me into the scared girl I once was. The night before trial, Ethan drove home from college to be with me. He walked in carrying takeout, dropped the bags on the counter, and gave me the kind of hug that lasts too long to be casual. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded against his chest. "Better now that you're here." He pulled back, studying me. "Mom, I'll testify if I have to. They can't win if the judge hears from me directly." I brushed his cheek with my hand. "We'll see. I don't want you dragged into their poison. But if it comes to it, we'll do whatever it takes." The morning of trial, the courthouse buzzed like a hive. Reporters weren't there. It wasn't that kind of case. But every hallway seemed packed with lawyers. Clerks, families waiting for their turn. My parents sat on their side, calm, polished, holding hands like the perfect grandparents. I noticed my mother's pearl necklace again, the same one she wore every court appearance. It gleamed like armor. My father nodded politely to people as if he were respected, admired, but when their eyes met mine, there was no warmth. Just calculation. The trial began with their lawyer painting a rosy picture. He talked about the sanctity of family, the rights of grandparents, the importance of generational ties. He spoke as though they had been waiting in the wings all along, aching for the chance to step in. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand with my knees shaking. I swore in, sat down, and gripped the wooden edge like it might keep me steady. Their lawyer started slow, smiling like he was my friend. "Emily, you had your son when you were 15? "Yes." "And his father wasn't involved?" "No, he wasn't. So you raised Ethan alone?" "Yes," his smile widened. That must have been very hard. Were there times you couldn't provide for him? I swallowed. I worked multiple jobs. I made sacrifices. But Ethan always had what he needed: food, clothes, a safe home. He leaned closer. But wouldn't you say he missed out on a stable, two-parent household? I forced a steady breath. He didn't miss out on love. And love is the most stable foundation a child can have. The lawyer's smile faltered. He changed tactics, asking about my teenage years, my struggles, the nights I cried myself to sleep. Each question was designed to cut me open, but instead of bleeding, I used the scars as proof. Yes, I struggled, I admitted. Yes, I was young. But I never abandoned my child. I never walked away from him. Can my parents say the same about me? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The lawyer's jaw tightened. When Janet stood for cross-examination, the energy shifted. She pulled out the letters, those old yellowed envelopes. Emily, can you explain what these are? They're letters I wrote to my parents after they disowned me. I begged them to be part of my son's life. They never responded. Janet turned to the judge. These were recovered recently by a neighbor. They show my client tried to reconnect. She wanted her parents involved. They chose silence. My mother's face paled. My father clenched his jaw so hard, I thought it might crack. For the first time, the courtroom saw a flicker of who they really were. That night, when I got home, Ethan was waiting on the couch. He stood when I walked in, searching my face. You held your own, didn't you? He asked. I sank into his arms, letting the weight of the day slip away. I didn't just hold my own, I whispered. I gave them a fight they'll never forget. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. The letters were powerful, yes. My testimony had landed a blow. But my parents were stubborn. They wouldn't go down without striking back, and I was ready. Because now it wasn't just survival, it was war. They didn't just push back. They attacked. A week after my testimony, their lawyer filed a motion for temporary custody, arguing that while the case continued, Ethan should live with them for stability. It was a legal stab, meant to shock and disorient. The notice came tucked between bills in my mailbox, the kind of paper that made your stomach drop. I unfolded it with trembling hands and read the words over and over until they meant nothing at all. You can't be serious, Janet said when I showed her. We sat at a diner booth under a buzzing neon sign, the coffee lukewarm between us. They want temporary custody while the case is pending? That's bold. It's also desperate. It's cruel, I said. The idea of my son packing a single duffel because some judge bought their sob story made me sick. They don't get to do that. They'll say they can offer him a two-parent household, stability, access to tutors, connections, Janet replied. You'll need to prove not only that you are a fit parent, but that removing him would be harmful. It's ugly, but we can fight it. That night I made a list. Evidence stacked against them. The letters, witnesses, the pediatrician's deposition. Evidence stacked for them. Their church testimonials, their tidy bank records, their polished smiles. The list looked like a battlefield map, and I was planning the next move. Then came the first hit. An email from Ethan's college housing director. A polite note asking if Ethan would be able to attend the scheduled intake meeting. Someone had called, concerned about his housing status. The caller had identified themselves as a family member. My hands went numb. They had already started to meddle with his life. Ethan slammed his car door and walked into the house 15 minutes later, face angry and pale. They called my dorm, he said without preamble. Told them they wanted to make sure I was, what? Safe, that they could provide better support. I told them to stop, told them to leave me alone. You did the right thing, I said, but my voice sounded small. I'll call the college. I'll make it clear you're not available for contact. He laughed bitterly. They'll spin anything. Mom, this feels like a siege. It did. Every small thing they touched turned into a serrated edge. They sent photo books of baby pictures to Ethan's friends with a note about family ties. They called his coaches, offering to help with travel costs for tournaments. They didn't realize, of course they didn't, that Ethan could smell the false from a mile away. To him, their generosity smelled of strings. Janet suggested a stronger offensive. If they're trying to create a paper trail of involvement, we'll beat them at their own game. We'll document everything. Any contact, any attempt to influence his school or friends, record it. Make it evidence, so I started recording. Not secretly. I checked legal boundaries first. Then I asked people to email me copies of calls, screenshots of messages, names, and times. I wanted a clear pattern to show the judge. This was not grandparents trying to reconnect. It was a campaign to isolate and control. One afternoon, the campaign took a darker turn. I got a call from Mark, the neighbor who'd found the letters, his voice tight with urgency. "Emily, I found something else in my attic. You need to come over." I drove there like a woman with her hair on fire. Mark led me to a shoebox he'd kept tucked away. He opened it slowly, as if revealing a relic that should have stayed buried. Inside were documents, old bank statements, letters, a folder with photographs. The photographs were of my parents with a man I'd never seen before, smiling at a ribbon-cutting event. The papers were invoices, receipts from a nonprofit charity my parents once touted as their pet project. But the invoices were odd, payments made to shell companies, checks routed through an accounting firm with no real address. My stomach dropped. "What is this?" Mark swallowed. "I don't know. But I remember them talking about how generous they used to be. I always thought it was pious bragging. Now, these payments don't add up. This was dangerous territory. Exposing it could ruin my parents, but it could also blow up in my face if I wasn't careful." Janet advised caution. "We can't just run to the press with paperwork," she said. "We need to vet this. Experts, corroboration, chain of custody. If we use it in court, the defense will shred it, unless we can prove where it came from." We hired a financial analyst on a shoestring budget, someone Janet had referred who took pro bono cases sometimes, who believed in justice more than profit. He pored over the documents and found what I feared: money moved through charities to accounts registered under shell company names. Payments that were supposed to go to needy families were redirected to companies with connections to my parents' church board. The paper trail smelled of laundering and tax evasion, but it needed more than a smell. It needed a smoking gun. Before we could act, their legal machine moved again. The defense filed a motion to suppress Mark's testimony, arguing that his discovery of the letters and documents was unreliable, that he could have tampered with evidence. It was a standard stall tactic, and it worked to delay things. I could see their strategy: bury and delay until frustration or exhaustion made the judge hand them what they wanted. So I decided to escalate in a way they wouldn't expect. I called an old friend from journalism school, Tara, who now wrote investigative pieces for a local paper. She owed me a favor from the time I covered a hospital story that made her editor happy. I didn't want a front-page smear. I wanted someone who could quietly check facts, corroborate the trail, and evaluate whether we had a case strong enough to present to the authorities. If there were crimes here, it shouldn't just be about winning a custody battle. It should be about truth. Tara met me at a coffee shop, laptop open, eyes sharp. She read the documents with the kind of attention that made me think she could smell deception like a bloodhound. "If this is what it looks like," she said slowly, "it's not just small time. It's organized. Do you want me to look into this?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "But be careful. I don't want Ethan dragged into a public spectacle unless it's necessary." She nodded. "I'll run the records, check nonprofit registrations, call sources. If there's anything illegal, I'll flag it. If it's just messy, I'll tell you. No sensationalism." Over the next weeks, the lines between legal defense and private investigation blurred. Tara traced vendor payments to a shell company that shared an address with a mailbox service. A phone number led to a disconnected line. But slowly, like a drip filling a bucket, facts accumulated. The nonprofit my parents had praised seemed more like a ledger for moving funds in and out. Meanwhile, their campaign to show concern escalated. They organized a supposed family reunion and sent invites to neighbors, calling it a chance to show Ethan they were ready to bond. They plastered their church's social media with photos of family dinners and volunteering events. The world they painted for the judge and for public eyes was tidy, charitable, and kind, but every polished photo was undercut by the documents in my drawer and the letters in Mark's attic. Their righteousness began to look like stagecraft. One night, after a long day of interviews, I stood in my kitchen looking at a picture of Ethan at graduation. I thought about the kind of life I'd built: long shifts, scraped knees, late-night studying. I thought about how a 15-year-old girl had once believed her parents would save her. Now it was their turn to be exposed. I tasted the sourness of revenge, but it no longer felt like anger. It felt like correction, like making sure the ledger of our lives was balanced. Tara called that night with a whisper of triumph. "I found payroll records linking your parents to a firm that's registered under one of the nonprofit's executives' names," she said. And get this, the firm paid for a luxury car your father uses in his name. It's tentative, but it's something. My hands shook. Then what? Then we don't go to the press yet, Tara replied. We build the case. We hand it to the right people, and we make sure the judge sees the truth. So we prepared. The next hearing would be a turning point. Either they would finally be cornered, or they would sink lower and try to drown us in legal fees and delay. I slept that night with the letters under my pillow, and for the first time in months, I dreamed of doors opening instead of slamming shut. The fight was far from over, but the battlefield was changing. I had found something that could cut them where they were most proud, their image. And for them, image was everything. The investigator's call came on a Thursday, when the house smelled like coffee and laundry. Tara had been methodical, patient, and suddenly her patience paid off. She had handed over a slim folder to the district attorney's office, along with copies of invoices, payroll records, and email trails. The DA's investigator, a woman named Claire, sounded tired but steady when she called. Ms. Carter, we reviewed the documents Ms. Klein provided, she said. There are enough inconsistencies to open a preliminary inquiry. We'll need you to sign an affidavit about how you came into possession of these materials, and we may ask for a formal interview. I felt a hollow, ecstatic kind of relief. This was bigger than family drama now. If the DA took it seriously, my parents' tidy image could crumble in a way the courtroom couldn't easily fix. It was proof that their concern was a cover for something uglier. Thank you, I said, voice small. I'll come in. When? Tomorrow. Bring the original letters that Mr. Cole found. We will photocopy everything. Claire out. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table with the phone still warm in my hand. I looked over at Ethan's graduation photo. He caught me staring and walked in, one eyebrow raised. You look like you swallowed a storm, he said. The DA might open an inquiry, I told him. They want to see the documents. I watched his face change from wary to guarded to something like pride. You did this, he said simply. You didn't just sit and take it. You fought, good, he meant it. His approval felt like armor, but it also carried a weight. If the DA was involved, everything my parents had built could collapse. That could be dangerous. The next morning, I met Claire at a downtown office. She was efficient, took my affidavit, and photographed the letters. Her questions were precise, and even when she mentioned legalities I didn't understand, I answered honestly. I recounted the night Mark knocked on my door. I described finding the envelopes. I signed my name with a hand that did not tremble. Back home, the house felt quieter. News like this makes a place feel hollow, as if truths are moving through it in ghosts. Ethan was calmer than I expected. He visited the campus advisors, confirmed his housing, and texted his friends to make sure they knew the family line was off limits. He wanted to live his life. He also wanted justice. In court the next week, the judge pushed back the temporary custody hearing. The DA's inquiry made the situation messy. Neither side wanted to move while law enforcement might be looking into possible fraud. My parents' lawyer slammed his hand on the table, arguing that investigations were a delaying tactic. They cannot use criminal inquiry as a shield to prevent a hearing, he snapped. The judge, a woman with no patience for theatrics, tapped her pen. We proceed when the court has all relevant facts, she said. But I will not allow this family to be torn apart on mere motions. We will reconvene when the DA has had time to substantiate any claims. It was a small reprieve, but a reprieve nonetheless. My parents' faces when the judge spoke were unreadable. I had seen them confident and polished. When bureaucracy shrugged, their posture shifted. Control matters more to some people than truth. After court, we waited by the parking lot like people at a slow train. My dad briefly caught my eye, and for a moment I thought he might speak. Instead, he walked past with my mother and their lawyer, smiling at passers-by. They never looked back. That night, my phone buzzed. It was a number I recognized as Tara. They're digging deeper, she said. I found a registered complaint from a vendor who says payments bounced or went to shell accounts. There's a contractor who says he never received funds he invoiced for direct aid. This looks like a pattern. Do you think they'll indict? I asked. I don't know yet. But there is enough smoke for the DA to look for fire, Tara said. If they follow it, it could get ugly for your parents. Ugly. I used to think ugly meant the messy emotional stuff. The cruel words, the slamming doors. Now ugly might mean subpoenas, freezing of accounts, public hearings that peeled the varnish off their perfect image. The thought made my chest loosen in a way I wasn't ready to admit. For the first time in years, I dreamt of a table where my mother and I sat across from each other and actually spoke. In the dream, she cried, and I didn't know whether to embrace her or strike. The next morning, I realized the dream was nonsense. I had no illusions about reconciliation. This was about justice and protection. Then the twist came. My parents pivoted strategy. Instead of continuing the polite court facade, they began to use the media. Not national reporters, not yet, but church newsletters, neighborhood blogs, and contact lists from their community groups. They published op-eds about family values and the importance of elders. A sympathetic piece ran in the church monthly, painting them as pillars of community who had been unfairly maligned by a vindictive daughter. Their words were curated, gentle, and designed to create doubt. I read the article with my stomach in knots. There were quotes from neighbors who had been nudged to speak kindly. It felt like watching a mask being rehearsed. Their attempt to shape public sympathy was painfully familiar. People trust polished stories more than messy truths. Ethan came home that evening furious. "They're gaslighting the whole town," he said. "They're making themselves victims." "They're trying," I said. "And it could work on some people." That's why truth matters now more than ever. That week, Janet and I worked on a plan. We would not let their narrative go unchallenged. We drafted a response, clear and measured, pointing to the pending DA inquiry, the recovered letters, and the pattern of silence from my parents. We reached out to people who had been directly affected by their nonprofit, families who had signed affidavits, but whose aid had never materialized. One by one, those families agreed to speak. Some were hesitant. Others had been quietly furious for years. Their testimony mattered. When the day came to present counter-evidence to the court, it felt like stepping into a battlefield fog. The DA's office sent a representative who explained they were still investigating, but had enough cause to issue subpoenas for financial records. The judge set a schedule. The publicity ramped up. My parents' church released a statement lamenting the testimony of a vengeful child, and the parishioners stood divided. My father sat with his fingers interlaced, jaw tight, and my mother watched with the composed face I had known since childhood. But in her eyes, I caught a flicker of fear. Control can look like composure, but fear peeks through the cracks. As we left the courthouse that day, a woman approached me cautiously. She was middle-aged, hair pulled back, eyes raw with old exhaustion. She introduced herself as Rosa. She handed me a folded sheet of paper with a list of dates and names, and her hands shook. "I used to volunteer there," she said. "I signed up for food drives and the checks never cleared. I was afraid to speak. But when I read those letters you wrote, I thought maybe finally someone would listen. I want to tell the truth." Her words hit like a hammer. People were coming forward. Not for me, not for spectacle, but because they wanted to be part of something that corrected a wrong. It was humbling. That night, Ethan sat with me at the kitchen table. We stopped pretending the battle was only legal. This had become the unspooling of a life that my parents had carefully staged. I looked at him, the man he was becoming, and felt both proud and terrified. "We might win," he said quietly. "But what if they try to break us first? What if they throw more at us?" "Then we hold," I said. "We stand. We keep telling the truth until no one can ignore it." He nodded, eyes steady. "We do that." Outside, the neighborhood lights blinked on like constellations. Inside, we were small but together. The road ahead was messy, uncertain, and dangerous in ways I had never imagined. But for the first time since I was 15, I believed we had the power to shape the ending. The next hearings would be rough. The DA might uncover things that sent my parents to trial. Or they might not. Either way, the war had changed. It was no longer just about custody. It was about unmasking a life built on a lie, and I was ready. The air inside the courtroom had shifted. It wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It had the chill of something bigger, heavier. Every time I walked through those double doors, the whispers followed. Some people had sympathy in their eyes. Others looked at me like I was tearing apart saints. That was the thing about image. Once people buy into it, they don't let go easily. The DA's subpoenas landed hard. Bank statements, board minutes, payroll ledgers, all delivered to the state. My parents' lawyer fought like hell to block them, but the judge wasn't swayed. "The integrity of charitable organizations matters," she said flatly. That one sentence hung in the air like a verdict of its own. At home, Ethan watched the news trickle in online. Local blogs picked it up, then small papers. Nonprofit under scrutiny. Community leaders face questions. They weren't front-page scandals yet, but the cracks were widening. One evening, Ethan slammed his laptop shut. They're calling you unstable in comment sections. People are saying you're doing this for money, that you're bitter. I sat across from him at the table, exhausted from depositions. Let them talk. The louder the lies, the clearer the truth will sound when it lands. But my voice shook. I hated seeing him upset. Hated that strangers were twisting our pain into gossip. The next morning, Tara called with something bigger. "Emily," she said, voice clipped, "we've got a whistleblower." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "A former accountant from the nonprofit. She reached out after seeing coverage. She says she was told to alter ledgers, move money between accounts, and hide shortfalls. She kept copies." I closed my eyes, gripping the counter. Proof. Actual proof. The kind that didn't bend under courtroom theatrics. When the whistleblower's documents were presented to the DA, the atmosphere in court shifted again. My parents' lawyer sputtered about fabricated vendettas and timing that smacked of collusion. But the judge's face was stone. The moment that cut through me came during a recess. My mother brushed past me in the hallway, perfume sharp, her pearls gleaming like armor. She leaned close enough that only I could hear. "You'll regret this," she whispered, voice calm as glass. "We raised you better than this." I turned to face her, my heart hammering. "You didn't raise me at all. You abandoned me. And now you're about to learn what regret feels like." Her eyes flickered. Just for a second. Then she walked away, her heels clicking like gunfire. That night, Ethan sat with me on the porch. We didn't turn on the lights. The sky stretched wide above us, stars scattered like forgotten truths. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Mom," he said softly, "if they fall, if this takes them down, are you ready for that?" The question dug into me, because the truth was I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted to see them stripped bare, every mask ripped off. Another part of me, buried deep, still longed for parents who could look at me without malice. But those parents had never existed. "Yes," I said finally. "If they fall, they fall. They built this themselves." He nodded, eyes glinting in the dark. "Then we finish it." The DA filed motions the following week. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, possible tax evasion. The words looked cold on paper, but I knew what they meant. Jail, collapse, humiliation. The custody case stalled completely. The judge refused to move forward until the criminal inquiry ran its course. My parents' lawyer blustered, argued constitutional rights, threatened appeals, but the tide had turned. The courtroom was no longer theirs. And then, the first real blow landed. A news station ran the story. Not a whisper on a blog, not a church bulletin, but a full segment at 6 o'clock, complete with interviews from families who'd been promised aid and never received it. Faces on camera, mothers crying, fathers shaking their heads. The story spread like wildfire. Ethan watched with his jaw tight. "There it is," he said. "That's the beginning of the end." But the end wasn't here yet. The more desperate people get, the more dangerous they become. I knew my parents well enough to understand they wouldn't surrender quietly, and I was right. The very next morning, I found an envelope on my doorstep. No return address. Inside, a single piece of paper with words scrawled in my mother's neat, cold handwriting. "Family should protect family. Stop this now before you destroy us all." My hands shook, but I didn't tear it up. I tucked it into the folder with the rest of the evidence. Because now it wasn't a warning. It was a confession. The war was almost over, but the ugliest battle was still ahead. The courthouse was packed for the final hearing. Reporters had squeezed themselves into the back row, their pens clicking, cameras waiting. What had started as a quiet custody dispute had exploded into something far larger. My parents weren't just fighting for Ethan anymore. They were fighting to salvage their legacy, their reputations, their empire of lies. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Janet beside me, her binder thick with evidence. Across the aisle, my parents looked smaller than I'd ever seen them. My father's suit hung looser, as if the weight of the investigation had eaten him alive. My mother still wore her pearls, but her hand trembled when she reached for a glass of water. The judge entered, her robe sweeping like a shadow. She wasted no time. "We are here today to resolve the matter of Carter versus Carter," she said, her voice firm. The custody petition filed by Mr. and Mrs. Carter against their daughter, Emily Carter, has been reviewed in light of recent developments. I could feel Ethan's presence behind me, steady, unflinching. He wasn't on the stand today, but he was the anchor in the storm. The first blow landed quickly. The DA's representative presented findings: fraudulent transfers, missing funds, fabricated board minutes. The whistleblower testified in person, her voice shaking but her story clear. Every word she spoke was another crack in the armor my parents had worn for decades. My father tried to hold his composure, but when their lawyer attempted to object for the 5th time, the judge shut him down. "The evidence is admissible," she snapped. "Sit down." Then it was my turn. Janet called me to the stand one final time. I walked up, feeling every eye on me. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. "I was 15 when my parents disowned me," I began. "I was scared, pregnant, and alone. I begged them for help. I wrote letters that went unanswered. They never showed up at my door, not once, not even when their grandson was born. And now, after 20 years of silence, they are here to take him from me." I held up the stack of letters, yellowed with time. I kept writing. I never gave up on them, even when they gave up on me. These are my words, begging them to love us. They chose silence. The room was silent except for the scribbling of reporters' pens. And when they finally came back, I continued, it wasn't out of love. It was because they wanted control. But you cannot rewrite history to hide neglect. You cannot abandon your child and then demand her child. Family isn't something you claim when it's convenient. It's something you fight for every day. I fought for my son. Alone, they didn't. When I stepped down, my knees were weak, but the courtroom was on fire. The truth had been spoken aloud, and no one could take it back. The judge leaned forward, her face carved from stone. "This court does not look kindly on those who attempt to manipulate both the system and their own family for personal gain," she said. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, your petition for custody is denied. Permanently." The word rang like a gunshot. Permanently, but she wasn't done. "Furthermore, in light of the ongoing criminal investigation into your nonprofit, this court will fully cooperate with the district attorney's office. Until those matters are resolved, any contact with Ethan Carter must be approved by this court. And given the evidence I have seen, I doubt that approval will come." My mother gasped. My father's face flushed red, his jaw tight as steel. For the first time, they were the ones trapped. As the gavel struck, the courtroom erupted, reporters rushing out, murmurs filling the air. I sat frozen, letting the moment wash over me. It was done. Outside, the cameras swarmed. Questions flew. "Emily, how do you feel? Do you think justice was served?" I ignored them all, walking through the chaos with Ethan at my side. When we reached the car, he grabbed my hand. "You won," he said softly. I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was a man, strong, steady, everything I had fought for. "No," I whispered. "We won." But the revenge, the real revenge, came later. 2 months after the trial. Headlines blazed across every major paper. Community leaders indicted on fraud and embezzlement charges. My parents were arrested. Their mugshots plastered across the same papers that once called them pillars of virtue. Their nonprofit was dismantled. The community they had manipulated for decades saw the truth at last. I watched the news that night with Ethan, sitting on the couch in the glow of the TV. My mother's pearls were gone, replaced by a county-issued jumpsuit. My father's polished smile had vanished, his face hollow. Ethan turned to me. "Does it feel like justice?" I thought about the nights I cried alone at 15, the mornings I worked double shifts to buy his school supplies, the years of silence that hollowed me out. I thought about their faces in the courtroom, cracked open for everyone to see. "Yes," I said finally. "It does." Ethan smiled faintly and leaned back, resting his head on the couch. "Then let it be over.